Hi, Harley here. Today's travelogue is going to Australia. Yesterday I talked about going to England and how I thought it was a long flight to England. Yeah, it pales in comparison to going to Australia. I think England was like 8 or 9 hours for the flight from Atlanta to uh, wherever I flew into in England. Um, the flight to Australia, LA to Melbourne, was 20 hours, 19 hours, something like that. It was long. And I was ready to get out of that plane along with everybody else. Holy cow, that was a long, long flight. Even with we flew into Auckland and had a layover about an hour or two in Auckland, New Zealand. And even with that, even with that breaking it up a little bit, it was still an awful long flight. Wow. Um, but eventually I got there. I was there for business, of course, like all my international travel. And with business travel, you really don't see much when you're there on business because you're in an office building and working with customers, and yeah, you really don't see much. So the trip itself really wasn't all that remarkable. Probably the least remarkable, actually, of all my trips was going to Australia. I was kind of wondering about that, thinking about why was it that Australia was kind of the least impacting of all the trips that I've taken. I wonder if it's because Australia and the United States are about the same age, both former British colonies, and both kind of started their founding right in the late 1700s, and so they're about the same age, a lot of the same history, and I wonder if that isn't some of it that there's enough similarities that the differences aren't terribly outstanding and noteworthy. Um, while I don't really remember much about the business side of the trip, other than being in an office building, one thing that really did stand out about the trip, and this was kind of the highlight of probably the whole trip, was the hospitality of the people. Um, just fantastic people. Every evening at somebody's house, having a barbecue or whatever with dinner, and just enjoying time with the people, and getting invited out to their homes in the evenings after work, and just hanging out. And just that's one of those. I've never had that with any other business trip that I've been on. Usually when you're well, I take that back. One group in Germany was similar, but those were people that we had actually worked on a team together, even though we were remote. We had daily meetings and everything. That's another story. But yeah, in terms of customers, just inviting us out to dinner and entertaining us and that kind of thing. Nowhere else have I had that kind of situation. Just really great people, the Australians. Now, having said that, the only time that I've ever been robbed on a trip was the taxi driver taking me to the airport. Um, this was back in the day before digital credit card transactions, and so got to the airport and he filled out the little paper slip, and I put in a tip and signed it and handed it to him, and everything was good. And when I got home and was reconciling my credit card statement at the end of the month, I found that he had modified one of the characters in the tens position on the tip, and something like changing a 1 to a 4, a 3 to an 8, or something like that. And so he got a really nice tip that day, not on my behalf, or on at my expense, without my intent. Let's just put it that way. And again, this was back in the day when it was hard to contest credit card charges and things like that, and it wasn't a big enough dollar amount to really go after, but it was large enough to kind of sting a little bit. And yeah, so the hospitality was noteworthy, but so was the robbery. um, but anyway, so I spent the week in Melbourne with the customers, and I had a friend that I had worked with for a number of years previously, had moved down there to Sydney, and so I flew from Melbourne to Sydney, and visited with my buddy Rob for the weekend. Met his new wife Tanya, and had a great time over the weekend. One thing though, somewhere in Melbourne, I had either picked up a little head cold or my allergies were acting up or something. And the flight from Melbourne to Sydney, my ears did not adjust to the altitude difference. I couldn't clear the air pressure difference. And right at about 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet, all of a sudden my ears started aching, and by the time we got to altitude, I thought I was going to die. I was expecting any minute to hear a big pop as my eardrums burst. Agony with my ears for that hour-and-a-half flight. But fortunately, got to Sydney, got back down to altitude, back down to ground level, everything was fine. And over the weekend, whatever it was that was causing my congestion cleared up. And fortunately for the trip home, I didn't have that problem. Otherwise, 20 hours of flying home with that, I don't know what I would have done. I don't know what I would have done with that. That would have been terrible. And then the final thing about, of course, flying from that side of the world back east to this side of the world, you go across the international date line, and it's just kind of always weird that you arrive like about the same time that you left after being in the air for 20 hours. Actually, I think we might have arrived home before we left. Kind of one of those weird time travel things. Anyway, that's it for my trip to Australia. Not a whole lot to talk about compared to my trip to England. But we'll talk again tomorrow about some other international travel tomorrow. Until then, go make something. Perfection's not required. Fun is.